On today's Locked On Thunder podcast, the Oklahoma City Thunder collapsed against the Minnesota Timberwolves. How did they unravel down the stretch of this game, and how much of it is concerning long-term versus a one-game sample size? We'll talk about it all on today's show.
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, in the words of Jalen Williams, that sucked. Let's get it going on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. I am your host, media member, and beat writer for Thunder on SI, Rylan Stiles. Follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at LOThunderPod. Email the show, LOThunderPod@gmail.com. We're diving into the Thunder collapsing against the Minnesota Timberwolves on the second night of a back-to-back. How did they unravel down the stretch of this game? How much of it can you truly take away long-term for this Thunder team, and how much of it was a lot of context being needed? This show, of course, is already polarizing in the comments. I can already sense the comments on YouTube from this show, on Twitter, that we've already fielded about a show that hasn't been recorded yet and a show only a minute and a half in. And I'm here to tell you, if you're expecting me to go scorched earth on this team or this game, you're going to be disappointed. But if you're expecting the truth of what happened, the facts of the matter, you'll be thoroughly entertained and you'll enjoy it a ton. So the Thunder blew a 25-point lead. A 25-point lead. Their offense didn't go stagnant, didn't go stale. It went ice cold. It went to embarrassing degrees of not being able to hit shots in that final quarter and in overtime. All of that is true. All of that also deserves context. So let me be clear. Blowing a 25-point lead, no matter what happened, is never good. It's a sign that you've taken your foot off the gas. It's a sign that you've dialed back your defensive intensity. All these things, even the players themselves said after the game. But it doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater of this one game. I think that there's an element here at play of, number one, the Thunder haven't lost a ton, so every loss is overanalyzed. Number two, the culture in Oklahoma is that football mentality that we talk about on this show a ton, so every loss feels damning. And number three, a lot of what unraveled you in this game, you're thinking back to that PTSD of last postseason. But the facts remain the facts. You can't conflate and confuse narratives with facts. The Thunder are 46-11. And what happened in this game? What led to this embarrassing collapse? The Thunder lost Isaiah Hartenstein, therefore had no center at all on this roster. They couldn't hit the broadside of the barn from beyond the arc on wide open looks. They couldn't score in the lane because the physical and downright harassing defense from Minnesota stifled them at every single time. So they just could not score offensively, even though their offense had a really good process and generated really good looks from beyond the arc. They could not put the pumpkin in the patch. And then defensively, Minnesota was able to get whatever they wanted, especially inside the arc, due to the fact that, you didn't have a center. So let me be the first to tell you, if the Thunder play a playoff game without Isaiah Hartenstein, without Chet Holmgren, and where they're not hitting any threes, they're going to lose that playoff game. If the Thunder play a whole series that way, they're going to lose that series. And the matchup can be anyone. It could be Lawton High. It could be Minnesota. It could be Sacramento. It could be Houston. It could be all these teams that you don't give a penny's worth of thought to of being able to beat the Thunder like Minnesota and Sacramento. And if they play this way, they're going to lose. But now that it's actually happened, we're acting like that's some revelation. We're acting like that's some sort of indicative nature of who this team is. This is not what the team is built on. The team's not built and designed to not have Hartenstein, to not have Holmgren, and to clank every wide open three. It's really not rocket science of this game of basketball. When they're driving and kicking and getting threes wide open in the corner and they're missing them, that's bad news, no matter who you play or how big the lead once was. And we're less than 24 hours removed from throwing a parade over the fact that the Thunder blew a 19-point lead last night and then still came back to win the game. And all of their sins were washed away. So for as awful as you feel right now, let's not forget that if Aaron Wiggins hits that wide open three in the corner, you don't care. You don't care. So keep that perspective when you're moving forward. So you can pull the receipts. I found it great that the sentiment that I had on Twitter was backed up by Mark and Shai and Jalen after the game. But even during the midst of their laboring, porous offense, where they literally did not score, not an exaggeration. It was a 16-0 run. They literally could not score. I was sitting there saying they're getting really good looks. They're getting really good looks. And so that's where I hesitate to, as much as you want me to come on here and pound the drum for just, you got to drive in the lane. You got to go to the rim. You got to stop settling for threes. They weren't settling for threes. They were generating threes. They were generating really good looks. And guess what happened? Luder was 1 for 5. Jada was 2 for 8. Kaysen was 2 for 8. Wiggins was 1 for 6. Caruso was 1 for 4. Everything flipped from a night ago whenever those guys were hitting timely triples. We just got done praising this team for the fact that in the third quarter last night, it was Wiggins who hit 3 straight triples. It was Isaiah Joe who was able to come through with timely threes to keep you within striking distance and let Shai take over the game. But in that fourth quarter, you went 2 for 15 from 3 and 6 for 29 overall. And so, yeah, if the Thunder have a performance like this in the playoffs, it's going to be concerning. It's going to lead to a loss. If in the fourth quarter, Jalen Williams goes 2 for 9. And in the fourth quarter, Aaron Wiggins goes 1 for 7. And, oh, yeah, you don't have Chet and you don't have, Hartenstein, and you have an 0 for 5 Alex Caruso. So that's why it's hard to, muster the hot takery that a lot of you crave in this current format and in this current era, because that's not a surprise to me. If I told you before the game that, and I left out the part that they had a 25-point lead, and I just told you, yeah, in the fourth quarter, you didn't have Chet, didn't have Hartenstein, and those were the statistics, you would have thought they got blown out. And why does it matter, right? Because a lot of you, again, want to have that mentality of well, under no circumstances should you blow a 25-point lead. The Celtics blew a 30-point lead last year, but regardless of that, under no circumstances should you blow a 25-point lead. Well, what got them to that lead? What got them to that mark of the 25-point cushion? I'll tell you what it was. It was Minnesota doubling, blitzing, and harassing SGA, and SGA getting off the ball, only he got off the ball to Isaiah Hartenstein, who is a just playmaking hub, who is a zone buster, who dealt out 5 assists in the first half alone. And by the way, you can only get assists by guys making shots, right? And in that first half, you got 2 threes from Shai. You went 1 for 2 from Kaysen. You went 1 for 2 from Wiggins. Jay Will hit a 3. Isaiah Joe went 2 for 4. And that's what gained you the 19-point margin. And then in that third quarter, right, you saw 3 minutes of action where you continued to see the Thunder have success, and then Isaiah Hartenstein gets bopped in the nose. And it was downhill ever since because you lost that piece to counter what the Timberwolves were doing to you. It's the exact same thing that happened to Minnesota one night ago whenever Clark went out. And he was giving Shai fits. He got hurt and the game changed. And so these things matter. right? And so how do they matter? Continued. Well, yeah, Jalen Williams was not good tonight overall in the fourth quarter and overtime. But he finished with 27 and 43, 27 points and 43% shooting. So a guy who scored 27 points is being lambasted today because he didn't show up in the fourth quarter and overtime. But why didn't he? Oh, yeah. Not so easy when Isaiah Hartenstein's not setting wipe away screens. Not so easy when you can't turn the corner off of a DHL. Not so easy whenever you can't cut to the dunker spot and have Hartenstein find you, right? Life's not so easy for Shai. When Shai can't get off the ball, the defense has to react to that. And now all of a sudden, Shai's playing as an off-ball player where you're not keeping that pressure on him whenever the ball's not in his hands. And he can get the ball right back on a give and go or a grenade screen from Hartenstein, and it shifts the defense. Oh, yeah, by the way, that Shai triple, a batted out rebound out to him that Isaiah Hartenstein creates with his rebounding ability. He had 5 rebounds in this game. So all of those factors do matter. When you had to send, help to the playmaker of Isaiah Hartenstein on the pick and roll, you had to leave somebody open. Like, this game was not even close to the embodiment of what this Thunder team is going to be, what this Thunder team is. Because you can look no further than Jalen Williams, who had 7 points on 60% shooting in the first quarter. He played so well that you messed with SGA's rotation because that lineup was rolling. Because SGA typically plays the entire first quarter. But you sat him down in the middle of the first quarter because Isaiah Hartenstein and J-Dub had such great chemistry and were really putting the pedal to the metal on the offensive end, which was a smart decision by Mark. But you took away his counterpart. And furthermore, let's say that this game plays out exactly like this, even with Hartenstein fully healthy. Well, if J-Dub's coming up short as a scorer, guess what Chet Holmgren is? He's an additional chance. He's an additional bite at the apple of somebody can hit a shot, somebody can score. Because for as bad as this all was, for as unraveling as it all got, you were a 3 away from really salting this game. So it's really tough to get the gumption for what people are craving right now, which is, these hot take rants. There's really nothing here, and we'll talk about it more coming up. But first, I want to say right now, our good friends over at DoorDash, go check out DoorDash today because NBA fans, get ready. When they swish, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. It's simple. When any player scores 50 or more points during a game in the 24-25 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. So whether it's a game day feast watching the next wave of games or a late night craving, or you stayed up late, watched that 50-point game, and you forgot to pack your lunch, so you need a quick and easy lunch the next day. With Dash Pass, you can get your favorite meals delivered with $0 delivery fees, reduced service fees, plus now you save even more with this exclusive NBA offer by signing up for Dash Pass and being ready to save. When a player drops 50 or more points in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day, up to $10 off. Just use promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating locations. Must be an active Dash Pass account. Terms and conditions apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast and the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. We said at the end of yesterday's show when previewing this game that Oklahoma City and Minnesota were facing what we would call a schedule loss in the biz. Second night of a back-to-back with travel. Well, how about a second night of a back-to-back with travel against the team you just played, and the tip time was 8:30 Sunday and 7 Monday, and Minnesota got to OKC earlier than the Thunder did. It's all stacking up, and you saw the dead legs, and you saw the shooting drop-off, which can be contributed to fatigue, can be contributed to bad legs. But look, both teams had to deal with that, right? And this was going to be a game of who's guttier. And Minnesota showed you their fight. They showed you the guts that they have for the second straight night. Because, again, this is why I don't like playing the results, because 24 hours ago, this same Timberwolves team went on a run, erased your 19-point lead, and grew a 7-point lead of their own. But because the Thunder won, it's kind of swept under the rug, right? It's kind of swept away because the Thunder won the game. These runs happen all the time. The Thunder went on a 24-0 run against Miami 2 weeks ago. But it ain't so fun when the Rabbits got the gun, right? Of this run happening whenever there's not a chance to regroup. The benefit for the Thunder a night ago was that run happened right before intermission. You could regroup at halftime. They did that. They settled in. And then in the fourth quarter, Shai took over. Shai won them the game. And Jalen Clark was out for Minnesota, just like Isaiah Hartenstein was out tonight for Oklahoma City in the midst of the game that they were both playing really well in. For Clark, it was yesterday. He was excellent defensively. And tonight, for Hartenstein, he was excellent on both ends, but especially connecting this team, getting hockey assists, and keeping the ball moving, keeping the offensive rhythm up, and creating space with the screens. And so the Timberwolves need all the credit in the world for sticking with this game, for carrying the fight for 48 minutes. I think that part of what I would guess would be part of why the Thunder took their foot off the gas was Minnesota trotted out there, down 16, a lineup that included bench guys like Rob Dillingham and Terrence Shannon Jr., rookies. And those guys took it to you. Those guys were bucket getters because the Thunder, who have proven to be a historically great defense, were a shell of themselves, partly because they had no center, partly because they just showed you zero effort. They showed you zero intensity from their own words. And yeah, that's terrible. And you got to be better than that. But guess what? Guess what? This season is 50 some odd games, 60 some odd games old. And the games that you can say that about the Thunder team are very, very, very few. It's less games about this Thunder team than any other team in the NBA, not named Cleveland, where they're about the same. Of games where you could say that they just didn't have it. They didn't execute. They didn't have the effort for 48 minutes. They didn't have the fight for 48 minutes because the Thunder didn't tonight, regardless of who played and who didn't play. And that's the part that I think that it is the biggest takeaway, was that you lost this game, not because you took too many threes, not because you didn't drive to the basket in the fourth quarter, but because you let go of the rope defensively for two whole quarters, a whole half. A whole half, you shouldn't play defense. And that shouldn't concern anyone, because the body of work speaks for itself of what this Thunder's defense is, what the Thunder defense has been and will be. But what I think happened, again, in this game to cause this overreaction was, you think back to a year ago. And to be fair to the audience who has these opinions, until you see something different in meaningful basketball, which I'd argue you did Sunday, but until you see it happen in the playoffs, frankly, that will be your lasting impression. That will be the thought in the back of your mind. It's like a second chance for anybody in life, no matter what they've done. Whether they've, went behind your back, talking mess about you, whether they cheated on you, whether they did whatever to you, right? If you give that person a second chance, any little thing will drum up those memories, press between the pages of your mind. And tonight, when you saw Jalen Williams not show up in the fourth quarter, when you saw 3 after 3 after 3 get clanked by role players that it looked like Minnesota was just willing to give you open threes, just like Dallas was at times in that series, and they couldn't cash in, they couldn't hit them. It did look eerily similar to what happened in the playoffs. But, right, you didn't have your biggest weapons, your biggest additions. Like last year in the playoffs in that Dallas series, for as bad as it was a 0-point differential, and you can quibble back and forth on how much that matters. But what did matter, undisputably, was the plus minus from Chet Holmgren whenever he was on the floor versus whenever he was not on the floor. The biggest addition being Isaiah Hartenstein, both literally and figuratively, of last year what unwound the Thunder was that they didn't have a backup center. Guess what? Tonight they didn't have a backup center whenever Isaiah Hartenstein went out with an injury and didn't get to play but 15 minutes. But newsflash for you, and all due respect meant to J. Will, who I thought actually played particularly well in this game. Like if this team has to rely on centers not named Hartenstein and Holmgren, yeah, it's not going to work out. It's just not. So I don't know why people are acting like that this is new information. So it sucked, but it's not worth holding on to. You just got to flush this game. And that's what we said on Sunday's show after the Thunder won. And when the Thunder were 12.5-point favorites, we said it on this show. You can go back and listen to it at the very end. There's timestamps and everything. You can go back and listen to it at the very end where we said that we're not going to have a big takeaway from this game because of the context of the game. And then we got even deeper context of this game. And, it bared out to be this, where it's just, there's nothing really to take from it. I think that the only conversation I'd be willing to have big picture would be about Jalen Williams and about how the Thunder can find a number 2 scoring option in the rest of this season and the playoffs, and what that will look like for this team come playoff time in moments like this when you need a bucket and they're pressuring Shai. And we'll talk about that coming up. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every single morning, every single day. We're here for you talking Thunder basketball. That game sucked, as J-Dub would say. That game saw J-Dub not play well down the stretch. Whenever everything was going wrong, he wasn't somebody who could step up and stop the bleeding. And that's what a number 2 scoring option does. In the fourth quarter, he went 2 for 9. And guess what? In overtime, he played all 5 minutes. He didn't take a single shot. He didn't take a single shot in overtime. That's what you can look to. And that's where I've gotten pushback from our good friend Andrew Schlecht. I've gotten pushback from you, the listener, for giving the context. I wouldn't say excuses. I'd say context of what if this team doesn't pull it off? And appreciating what you're asking of this team, what you're asking of Jalen Williams, what you're asking of this roster. To spoil the playoff preview show, I'm picking the Thunder to make the Western Conference Finals. I'm picking the Thunder to make the NBA Finals. But if they don't pull it off, I have a hard time grappling with anything short of the finals. Is it a failure? Because what if Jalen Williams is not a number 2 scoring option? That's the role he's casted in this year. What if he's not ready to fill those shoes? I don't think that that's an indictment on J-Dub for the future. I don't think that that's an indictment of J-Dub for next season or the year after that or the year after that. And I don't think it would be all that shocking if a second-year guy in terms of postseason experience, a guy in his second ever playoff run, isn't up to task. And here's what I think the Thunder are banking on that they didn't have the luxury of tonight was you're going to get good J-Dub games. And you're hoping that in games like this where J-Dub isn't good in the fourth quarter, isn't good in overtime, well, guess what? You still have Chet. And you still have the stuff we've talked about, Isaiah Hartenstein creating, but more importantly, you have Chet. You have a guy who can get second chance opportunities with putbacks. You have a guy who can score in the mid-range. You have a guy who can knock down threes. And you have a guy who's really improved at getting to his spots off the dribble, off the catch, and has progressively, even since returning from injury, gotten better and better and better at that as he's returned, to where you hope in the playoffs he can be even better at doing that than he has shown since the injury. And pre-injury, he was stellar at it. But you give yourself another bite at the apple twofold. Number one, as a second co-star for Shai. Number two, for as bad as this game was, as we've mentioned countless times now, you hit one more three in the third quarter, the game's over. And he's a guy who could have stepped up whenever nobody else could hit and hit a three. Or get you a bucket, however you prefer, whether it's at the rim or from three. So J-Dub is going to field the questions. J-Dub is going to be overanalyzed. Shadab is going to be picked apart for if he can be up to the task for being a second option. And frankly, I think it's disingenuous to the audience to tell you that he's some bona fide number two. He's not. I think he can be that. I think he can be a good enough number two with all that happens in a playoff setting, which factors in Shai playing 42 plus minutes a night. With all that happens in a playoff setting, I think he can be good enough and they can cobble together good enough scoring around Shai to go to the NBA title. I really believe that. But I'm not going to pee on your leg and tell you it's raining and act like J-Dub is a bona fide number two because he's an all-star and scoring 20 points a night. I just can't get there. Because I do think it's unfair to J-Dub to do that. Because it sets the expectation so high that it's unobtainable without him being somewhat of an anomaly. Of like, without him looking like a deer in headlights in the playoffs last year to all of a sudden having it figured out from one playoffs to the next in his second ever try. Like, short of him doing that, people are going to view him as a failure this year, and I think that that's unfair. I think that that's unfair. And it goes back to another thing from this game about shooting. Guys, they're going to have bad shooting nights in the playoffs. And guess what? They're going to lose games in the playoffs. I know that you've only seen them lose 11 times, and so this is all still new. They're going to lose. But the goal is to not lose 4 before you win 4. And in the race to 4 wins, I think that even whenever you have off shooting nights, you're going to get to those 4 wins faster than the other team. And that's the nature of it. So I'm not saying, like, whenever we were talking last night about how the Thunder are different from what they were a year ago. Again, last night they were a fully healthy team for one. For two, though, talking about Wiggins hitting timely threes, for example, and he didn't hit threes tonight. I'm not saying that in the playoffs he's going to never have a bad shooting game. But I don't think he'll have a whole series where he can't shoot. Same with on down the rest of the marginal players, the complementary players. And now all you can do is hurry up and wait, because it either will be or won't be on if they do it or not. Before we get out of here, what an embarrassment that Chris Finch was after the game. What an outright embarrassment and an insult to the intelligence of NBA fans and the league itself to, after you win a game, say, quote, "It's so frustrating to play this team," talking of the Thunder, "because they foul a ton. They foul all the time. And you can't touch Shai. It's very frustrating," from Chris Finch. That's embarrassing. Because the implication there is that the Thunder get away with fouling. And oh my goodness, the Thunder just foul so much and they never get called for it. But yet here we go and we breathe on Shai and he flops his way to the free throw line. And that's just not true. That's just not true. And and again, that's feeding into narratives. And I don't care about narratives. I care about facts. When you look at who has the highest free throw attempts a game, the Thunder sit 29th in free throw attempts per game. Shai gets free throws. That's a certainty. Nobody else does. And when you talk about, right, who allows their opponents to shoot the most free throws, who allows their opponents to shoot the most free throws in this league, meaning that they foul a lot and they get called for fouls because their opponent's going to the free throw line, Oklahoma City is 28th. So yes, the Thunder do foul a lot. That part is correct. But they get called for fouling a lot. They get called for fouls. So to frame it as though like they foul a lot and don't get called for it, they get away with fouling a lot is so untrue. The Thunder get called for the 28th most personal fouls. Minnesota, on the other hand, only gets called for 18 personal fouls a game. They get away with fouling a lot because they're really good and really disciplined at playing aggressively without fouling. And to do that in a game that you won. And not only did you win the free throw battle, 39 attempts to 29 attempts. And for the second straight day, you shot more free throws in Oklahoma City. Is an embarrassment to the sport. It's an embarrassment to the fans. It's an embarrassment to yourself. It's an embarrassment to your family, frankly, to do that. Because it's not true, utterly ridiculous, wrong, and you can't even argue it was the heat of the moment because you won the game. If you would have said that on the flip side of this coin, right? If the Thunder made a 25-point comeback and won, and he said that, I wouldn't even comment on it. But if I did comment on it, I would wipe my hands of it and say, you know what? That's the man in the arena. That's somebody who's fighting his guts out for his team and is playing the game of gamesmanship, trying to get calls. He's frustrated. What's there to be frustrated about? The Thunder foul more than anybody in the sense of they get called for fouls more than anybody, and they don't take free throws. So your whole thesis statement is wrong. You would fail your capstone, Chris Finch. It's wrong. What are we talking about? And again, I can't even excuse it as gamesmanship, because what are you hoping the refs look at? We do call the Thunder for the 28th most fouls in the league. Let's go ahead and make that 30 because of Chris Finch. What gamesmanship is what Mark did earlier this year whenever he called out the Los Angeles Lakers by name and talked about their whistle. Because that's actually true. You have the statistics to back that up, and you're hoping that whenever you call it out by name, that maybe it gets into the ref's ear. Maybe they start looking for it. Maybe they start changing that whistle. The whistle's exactly where you want it if you're Chris Finch. It's exactly where you want it. And the most frustrating thing of all is that you shouldn't want the Thunder whistle to change at all if you're an opponent. I get that Shai going to the free throw line is a lot, and it's frustrating because he's so good. You get away with a lot on everybody else. We talked about how the Timberwolves were stifling those drives in that fourth quarter. They got away with some stuff that the Thunder did not get away with because of their reputation. The Thunder's reputation is they foul a lot, so anything close, they get called on. That's how you get this lopsided whistle. And you should want that if you're a Thunder opponent. But let's play into this fantasy world that Chris Finch is living in, that somehow a multi-million-dollar coach does not have access to the same data and the same statistics that some schmuck in Oklahoma City with a microphone does. Let's play into that world. Let's do it. If that's the case, the Thunder should be excited. Because if they're getting away with murder, and if they're getting away with assault right now in the regular season, well, then imagine what's going to happen in the playoffs whenever that whistle tightens up and when you get to play more physical. Like, the Thunder are craving that playoff whistle right now to take away some of their reputation fouls, because they do foul a lot, but they also do get a ton of reputation calls in the negative sense of, because they foul so much, anything close, blow the whistle. And the other team gets to play a little bit freely on the defensive end because of it. So again, I thought it was despicable from Chris Finch, not because it was attack of the Thunder, because you can attack plenty, but because it was just flatly wrong. And there was really no excuse for it. You should be celebrating this win if you're Chris Finch. You should be complimenting your guys for the great nights that they've put together back to back. I know that they lost last night. That was a great effort by them to get down 19 points and keep digging themselves out of that hole and giving themselves a shot to win. And the resolve and the grit and the aptitude that this team showed in Minnesota to not only get down 19 last night and come back to take a 7-point lead and then lose, but to get down by 25 points tonight to the very same team whenever you had every excuse in the world to roll over and die, and they didn't, and they came back and they won. That should be what people are talking about from Chris Finch's post-game press conference, not this asinine statement about the refs. And I think he did a disservice to his team. I think he did a disservice to his players. And he did a disservice to himself, because he coached a heck of a game. But now, this is what you talk about. And if anybody, which in the modern world, this is the beautiful thing, you can just throw anything out there and trust that nobody will take the time to go fact check it. In the modern world, like, if anybody does any semblance of research to see if what he's saying is true, they're going to find out it's a lie. And why? Why put yourself in that position if you're Chris Finch? It was ludicrous after this game. We'll talk more tomorrow about what Minnesota provides as a threat. We're also going to talk about concerns. What is a big concern? What's a little concern? What's really no concern about the Thunder, and as far as the playoff picture goes from an internal standpoint? What do they do right? What do they do wrong? We'll talk about it all on tomorrow's show. But until then, be good and be good to one another.